Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the biggest, the baddest, the most ranked choice storytelling program in all of Alaska. It's time for Dark Winter Nights, True Stories from Alaska. And to get things started, please welcome to the stage, Kinky Slinky.
Turn around, look at what you see in her face, the mirror of your dreams. Believe I'm everywhere, in my lines, written on the pages, is the answer to a never-ending story. The stars, fly a fantasy, dream a dream, and what you see will be. Rhymes that keep their secrets, hold behind the glass, and there upon the rainbow is the answer to a never-ending story. The dawn of a new day. Rhymes that keep their secrets, unfold behind the clouds, and there upon the rainbow is the answer to a never-ending story. Never-ending story.
Welcome to Dark Winter Nights, everyone. Please round of applause for Kinky Slinky! All right, Bill, why don't you introduce the band for us?
Absolutely. Kinky Slinky is Dapper John Keach on the bass guitar, Dr. Mary Beth Lee on the lead cello, and I am Bill Schnabel on the two-fingered C chord.
All right, awesome. And John, will you tell us a little bit about the type of music you guys typically play?
That's a good question, Rob. We play an eclectic experimental mix of old, new, and original music.
All right, it's the specificity that makes you so special, I think. And
I am a
Mary
bass
Beth,
player.
You guys have any performances coming up that people would like to see a little bit more of Kinky Slinky in action?
Yeah, we'll be playing on campus at the Great Hall on January 14th as part of the big Here Comes the Sun event hosted by UAF Summer Sessions.
Sweet. And what about social media if they want to keep in tune on future programs?
Yeah, if you're so inclined, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We're at Kinky Slinky Band.
Okay, and then I got one final question. I don't know if you are familiar with this song. Is the title song from the 80s movie Neverending Story, right? Sweet, you're on it. I've always had some questions, though, like about the lyrics, because they seem like to be operating at a plane I don't really understand. For example, one of the lines is, rhymes that keep their secrets will unfold behind the clouds, and there upon the rainbow is the answer to a never-ending story. And I thought, since you all are like composers, like you write music for your band, could you explain what that means?
I think in this case, Rob, it may be that if you have to ask the question, you probably won't get the answer.
I don't know. I think it might be about the transportive nature of literature and poetry and a good story. Does anyone here like a good story?
I actually, and while those are both correct, I also think that, Rob, this question requires a never-ending answer. And it all starts with a woman named Moonchild.
Okay, all right, well,
and
thanks.
a dog
We'll get you in the
dragon
next.
named
You can do that in the midnight something. Everybody, one more round of applause for Kinky Slinky.
Thank you.
All right, how's everyone doing tonight? Yeah, well, all the rest of you were, making sourdough bread and watching Tiger King during COVID. I was practicing the keytar. Who feels stupid now, right? And for those of you who thought I was just like playing along to a recording, that's why I goofed it up a little bit, so you'd know, like. That's legit. That was the actual thing. Some other songs I learned. There you go. Turns out my mom was right. Learning to play piano would make me popular. Let's see, what are the latest news since our last show was in February? What's happened? Let's see. Well, we elected Mary Peltola, the first Alaska Native congressperson. I don't care who you are. That's a pretty awesome thing. Did anybody see she got a little support from Luke Skywalker? Did anyone else get that? Okay, if you didn't get it, and this is 100% true, most of what I say, 95% of what I say is lies up here. This is 100% true. This is the text I got from Luke Skywalker. Robert, it's Mark Hamill. Mary Peltola's historic victory against the dark side of shady special interests and extremist millionaires filled so many of us with a new hope, which I suppose is better than filling us with a Revenge of the Sith, because that sounds like something a gringo would get in Mexico. Get it? As some people know the movie names, Revenge of the Sith. Anyway. For the record, Mark Hamill's net worth is about $18 million, so I guess he doesn't have a problem with millionaires. It's the extremist millionaires that he's got an issue with. He continues, but our rebel alliance won't fly under the radar this time. The forces trying to hold us back won't underestimate Mary again. I promised Mary I'd help her to raise $75,000 she needs to get her TV ad on air, pay her incredible staff, and reach voters across the state. Robert, this is my favorite part. You're my only hope to help re-elect Mary in 40 days. Please, will you pitch in $25? And I really wish I could go back in time and tell my 10-year-old self that someday you will get a message from Luke Skywalker on your personal communication device, and he will be asking you for money. Like, how rich am I in the future? And it made me wonder if they'd had texting a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Would Skywalker have done the same? Would he have, texted the rebels? I think so, and I think it might have gone like this. Dear Jar Jar Binks, 4 years ago, you contributed to our campaign to destroy the Death Star and defeat the evil Galactic Empire. But now the Empire is building another Death Star, and we need your help to destroy it again and defeat the Emperor and his extremist crony, Darth Vader. Will you contribute 15, 20, 25 other dollars to defeat the Empire and restore peace to the galaxy? You're our only hope. And I think if I was Jar Jar, I'd be like, I don't know, I contributed the first one, you blew it up. Now they're just building another one? Why don't we just wait and see if they run out of money or something like that? This is getting expensive. In the world of Dark Winter Nights, we have some fun news. Our first book came out called Cabin Stories, The Best of Dark Winter Nights, available in bookstores. Thank you. We have it for sale in the lobby, 10% off tonight. If it sells out, it is available on our website. And my favorite thing about the book is that it looks like the dog is about to do something horrible on my name. And he looks like a little happy about it, too. So there you go, my first book, and it looks like a dog is about to poop on my name, but that's all right. Okay, I'm going to take a moment here to explain the show. First of all, who are our new people? Who's never been to Dark Winter Nights before? All right, thank you so much for coming. This is the part where I tell jokes that only I think are funny while we wait for late people to arrive. Who has been drugged here against their will by a friend or significant other? Okay, you are my people, all right? I hope you can enjoy the show despite your bad attitude. And who has drugged someone here against their will? Okay, there we are. I assume you're sitting next to each other. Thank you. Without people like you, I would never leave my couch, so I appreciate that. And who's been to the show before? Yeah, all right. I assume that means you like it. I don't know, you're a masochist or something. If you could please explain it to people around you, should they be confused at some point. We do have a hilarious show planned for you tonight, and it starts with me stopping making dumb jokes and you silencing your cell phones, please. Here's how the show works. We got two forms in the program for you to consider. The first, which I don't have, is the memory form. So in each show, we like to read memories from all of you on stage between storytellers. And we have a different theme each show. And the theme for this show is, what's your best, what the heck am I doing here memory? And I guess for you all, it's like right now. For me, it was when I walked into the FMH ER, soaking wet, barefoot, mostly blind, and with bleeding profusely from my knee. And I was like, how the heck did I get in this position? And that's when I learned that the Chena River will kick your ass if it wants to. It is not to be messed with. You can also post your memories to our Facebook page, facebook.com/darkwinternights. So right on those little sheets, hopefully we've got enough pens and stuff for you, and there'll be ushers coming up and down the aisle between storytellers. You can turn those in there, and I'll read them on stage. And then on the back of the program, we have this form where you can fill out if you would like to tell a story tonight. We will be picking, assuming we get people to submit, we will be picking one of you to tell a story tonight without any sort of preparation after intermission. So if you want to do that, go ahead and fill that out. There are some rules, of course. First, it has to be a true story. It has to take place in Alaska. It has to have happened to you. I'd love if it was under 15 minutes. And you have to put your own name down, hardy har har, like putting your bro's name down and getting them called. Great. That would be hilarious. I'm going to preemptively laugh at that joke. Please write your own name down. You can hand that in between storytellers, or you can hand it in at the information table at intermission, and we'll pick someone at the end of intermission. If you do not want to tell a story tonight, please make sure to circle the other time option, or you will have a fun surprise after intermission. The form has other stuff on there. If you'd like to rat out somebody you know who has a great story, you can put their name on there, and we'll contact them. If you'd like to get the newsletter, if you'd like to help us with the show, that's great. We are going to have a 15-minute intermission with potatoes served by the Hutchinson High School Acadeka, who receive 100% of the profits of that. And then Molly Denali is going to bring you in at the end of the 15-minute intermission. If you don't know who Molly of Denali is, you're going to find out. It's going to be pretty clear. All right. So get those memories into me quick so we can start reading those right away. In the meantime, let me introduce our first storyteller. Have you ever had it where you went out of your way to do the right thing, and instead, by accident, you end up making things incredibly worse? Well, I'd like to welcome our first storyteller who had that experience. He's a Dark Winter Nights executive producer and my oldest friend. Not that I've known him very long, but he's like the oldest person I know, is what I mean by that. Please welcome Chris Zwolinski with a story we call Camp Etiquette.
I know you do. Right there. Thanks. Hello. Right after I finished school, I left Detroit and hitchhiked straight to Alaska. Didn't have a game plan, no curriculum. I just thought I'd go here for a year or two and see what happens. The very first job I got was totally by accident. I was hired to be a packer or camp help for a guide in a hunting camp. After a couple of months, the season ended. I didn't have any money because I didn't get paid, and I broke my leg in 3 places while I was out there. Nonetheless, the next year, I got a job for a guide in a hunting camp. And this kind of progressed. As the years went by, it evolved with me getting an assistant license, and then I got a registered guide license, started my own business. But even though I had my own outfit now, I would still work for Richard, one of my former employers, and it was after my season was finished, and it wasn't so much for the money. It was because he'd send me to places that normally I wouldn't be able to get to or go. And this was one of my habits, even when I worked construction. If they were going to send me someplace cool, new, Nome, Barrow, Kodiak, I'm in. Let's go. Well, Richard would send me to Cold Bay. Cold Bay is at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, the end of the line before the Aleutian Islands start. It's about 900 miles southwest of Fairbanks. It's further if you're flying in a Super Cub airplane. And it's a lot further if you're sitting in the back of a Super Cub with the wind beating you around, airsick, and thrown up into a Maxwell House coffee can that used to belong to the pilot. But it's really a spectacular place, the whole peninsula. It's dotted with active volcanoes. It's got these snow-capped mountains that run the length. It's teeming with wildlife, brown bear, caribou, and I mean, untold numbers of waterfowl. It's fantastic. The downside of the peninsula is the weather. The wind, it never seems to quit blowing. The rain never seems to stop falling. And when you're out in the field, it's just brutal. It's a constant battle to keep your gear dry, to keep yourself dry, to keep the tents from blowing away. It's always work. By the end of the season, you're just beat. You're just bruised up. And so much so that a lot of guides go, that's it. I'm not going anymore. I'm done with it. But after a year goes by and you kind of forget about the misery, you kind of like, yeah, we're going to the peninsula. Of course I am. Yeah, why not? And I played this back and forth seesaw kind of game for about 10 years. This particular year, I was hired to guide a spring brown bear hunt, and it was May. There was 2 very different things this year. One is that it was sunny. I mean, like hot and sunny, blue skies every day. So sunny that most everybody in the field got sunburned. Nobody thought to bring sunscreen, and there's one store in Cold Bay. They didn't sell any because they never carried it. The other thing different about this season is that I was given a packer, and I'd never had packer or camp help before, ever, and I didn't think I really needed it. But this was Rod's first season in Cold Bay, and they thought they'd put him with somebody that had experience, and I guess I have experience. By now, I've been running camps for 20 years, so maybe I have something to teach him. Maybe I'm going to be his mentor or something. So Rod and I go about setting up camp, and by now I've got my specific way of doing things. We use these dome-style mountaineering tents, 4-person tents, and I like to put the cook tent here, the gear tent there, sleeping tents. There's a real thought process that goes into it for me, just depending upon the terrain. And one of the things I like to pay attention to, besides the tents, is where the latrine goes. There's going to be 3 of us, myself, Rod, and the client that hasn't showed up yet, and each of us are going to get their own latrine, which is just a hole in the ground. But they get theirs. You poop in yours, I use mine, everybody's fine. The only thing that I ask you to do is, because things don't rot so well in Alaska so quickly, I like to burn my toilet paper, and I explained that this is, what I prefer you to do. It's kind of my leave no trace thing. And I'm not going to police your area or anything, but please do it. And maybe, to me, that doesn't need any more explaining. I did have a time, a different incident in another camp where I explained all that to a client. And while I was cooking dinner over a driftwood fire, he came walking back from his walk in the woods. And I know this sounds like an exaggeration, but he had a wad of toilet paper like the size of a soccer ball, all brown and white. And he just casually walked right up and just kind of hooked it in the fire when I was working there. So, you know, maybe I have to explain things a little better or work on my delivery or something. But anyway, nothing like that happened now in this camp in east of Cold Bay. So let me tell you about the camp setup. Richard likes to fly in well, he can only fly in at low tide. We're on the ocean beach. Flies in at low tide, which only gives a certain window during the day that he can land. Drops us off. And I set the camp up about 200 yards inland. Perpendicular to the beach is a ridge and a 3 or 4 foot wide creek running parallel with the ridge into the ocean where we get our fresh water from. And behind us is these rolling hills that go toward the mountains, and it's all this beautiful dry grass that's a little over your knees that's waving in the breeze, all of last year's grass, and there's plenty of country behind us. So the client, Jake, gets flown in, and it's very evident that, he can't walk very well. But that's all right. He explains his physical limitations. That's fine. We're a team. We're going to work together, do what it takes. We're not going to be able to climb any hills or hike any long distance that I'm used to, but that's okay. It's his hunt. And we got plenty of time, and look at this weather. I think, what do I care? So fast forward, end of a couple of weeks, he is successful. It's the end of the hunt and actually the end of the season. And now we're waiting around for Richard, the outfitter, to fly in and check on us and start taking us out. Certainly there were satellite phones, radios, everything available. We just didn't have any. Maybe he's a tightwad or something. I don't know. He never gave us any. So also during this last couple of weeks, I hadn't been burning my toilet paper. It wasn't because I didn't want to. I just didn't have a lighter on me at the time. So I know I have to make a conscious effort here and carry my lighter. So during one of what would possibly be one of my last trips, I had my lighter, and after I was done using the facilities, I'll finish here, and I took my Bic, and I had a pile of paper there that had been collecting. I wasn't really collecting it. And I flicked my Bic and torched it. And what happened, I never expected this to happen. It just never dawned on me. Some flaming paper rolled off and caught the grass on fire. And like right now, it caught on fire. You know that flash paper, the magic show? It just took off. And I'm stomping around. I'm wearing hip boots. And I'm bouncing around, stomping on the fire. And like after about 30 seconds, I'm like, oh my God, I'm not catching up with this. And I don't know what, I'm not gaining on it. My stomach is in a knot. I'm just sick. And I need help. But if I yell for help, it's just going to totally expose my stupidity. So I just keep on stomping. I'm stomping away, and the flames, but when I look, the flames are going right toward the camp. The wind's blowing it toward camp, and I'm like, oh, man, I got to do something. So I yell out, Rod! And Rod looks up from whatever he's doing in camp. He gets up, and he looks at me, and now what I could have yelled a number of things. I need help, come quick, something like that. But I yelled out about the stupidest thing I could have possibly said. I go, I burned my toilet paper. And he's eager to help. He's always is, and he just didn't hesitate. He sees the situation. He grabbed a bucket, and he scooped some water out of that creek and came running over. I'm still stomping away, and he sloshes it on the fire. And then he runs back, and I run back with him. I get a bucket. We both come out there and slosh. We're not gaining. It's going toward the camp, and the tactic changes. Now we're thinking, well, let's save the gear. So we take our water buckets, and we start pouring water around the tents. But the flames are coming, and they're coming fast. And I'm thinking, it's coming in too fast. We're not going to have enough time, and I don't know what to do. And if he's looking for an idea from the guide, Mr. Wilderness here, the mentor, I don't have any ideas. So I know Jake, and it's like, Jake, God, what about Jake? And I did not say, we have this under control. He came out of his tent. We have it under control. I didn't say that. I said, head for the beach. which he did on his own accord as fast as he could walk. He ran for the beach, walked to the beach. And so Rod and I, now we've come up with a different plan. Why don't we take our gear and get it across the creek? It's about 4 or 5 feet wide. Get it across the creek. Okay, we'll do that. So we're hauling the heavy stuff, the cots, the cook stove, the food boxes. We're hauling everything across the water as fast as we can, but we're not gaining. And we just said, stuff it. And we pulled the tent stakes and just grabbed the tents like giant sacks and started dragging them across the tundra, across that water, across the 4 or 5 foot wide creek. Dragged it over there hoping this is going to serve as a fire break. Dragged everything over. And we did. We made it. The fire just kind of, in a minute later, it came through, and it just, right through camp. Just burned right through what was our camp, and then it just kept on going beyond, down. And I'm just watching this and going, oh, God, I'm just sick. I've never seen anything like this. I've never caused anything like this before. And it, as bad as it was, it burned out in about 35, 45 minutes. It did burn out. As bad as it is, it could have been worse. That day, the wind was blowing from the mountains out toward the ocean. Any other day of the season, it had been blowing from the ocean toward the hills. It could have burned for miles, maybe into the trees. I don't know. But this would have been something they'd been calling smoke jumpers, a tundra fire. I don't know. But it did burn out. And even though in 5, 6 weeks, with the rain, it's gonna turn green again. Nobody's ever gonna know. Right now, I'm looking at like 40 acres of black. It's like, leave no trace. I'm so embarrassed. I'm mortified looking at this like, oh, my stomach is just turning. And it's not just what I've caused. I know that when word gets out back at main camp, all the other guides find out this is a rough crew now. They're going to tease me no end. I am just going to be beaten down and mocked, and rightfully so. I mean, I caused this. But at hand right now, nobody got hurt. We didn't lose any gear, a little soggy. We just put our camp back up on the opposite side of the creek. Put everything together, dried things out. And now, the very next day, Richard did come flying in. And what I knew it's obvious he's going to see what is obvious, that terrain has changed a little bit. And so he kind of came down low, and he has a slow circle around. And the three of us came out. I made sure nobody waved to or anything that he might indicate for distress. We're okay. He sees us, 3 people, 5 tents, different spot. He kind of looked at all that, and one of the things that Richard likes, I've known, worked for him for years, I know what he likes. He wants, as soon as somebody comes out, when he's coming in, he wants a wind indicator, something big and flashy, always. My method of operation all these years was to string out about 6, 8 feet of toilet paper, actually, and which I happened to have. I had some left, so right handy. So he landed, but the tide wasn't out all the way. And he couldn't land close to camp. He landed about a half mile away, which is fine because I was in no hurry to get to the airplane and explain to him what happened. Rod, on the other hand, he's much younger than me. Rod, on the other hand, he ran after that airplane like it was like pizza delivery wagon, like he hadn't eaten for months. He went up there and like, thanks, Rod. By the time I got to the airplane, he had already told Richard the story. The beating I was going to take was just beginning. So Richard lined us out for the next day, and the next following day did go off without a hitch. He came back in, flew Jake out, Rod out, and then the gear, flew everything out. And I'm always the last person to clean up everything. I'm the last one, get in the airplane, we take off. Kind of turned as we took off. We could see over this black, and if it looked ugly from the ground, I'm telling you, from the air, it looked disastrous. It was horrible. So I did sneak in a couple pictures. It's not like I put them in a photo memory album or something, but I never showed them to anybody, actually. So we flew in toward main camp. This is where everybody from all the spike camps are gathering, and before they would get flown out to Cold Bay, to the town of Cold Bay, and then go home. So I know what's coming. I know they're going to beat me up about this, but I got to take my lumps. I deserve it. We land. I unload the airplane, and start talking to the other guys, and they're telling me what happened in their camps, what they'd seen, who got what, and who got the best suntan, but nobody had talked about my little incident, and I didn't bring it up, and so I think, wow, I dodged a bullet. That's cool. That's great. So then I went over to, after about a half hour of visiting with everybody, I went over to the main tent, which is a big walk-in tent, Quonset hut style, with a steel frame and a plywood floor. I went over to make myself some coffee. Nobody was in the tent. As soon as I opened up the door, I walk in. I saw on the wall was this Newsweek magazine cover. And there's a photograph, and it's leaping vivid flames on the photograph. I'm like, Newsweek? God, how'd they find out? So, but when I got up closer, upon inspection, I'm kind of looking, and I go, it's Los Angeles. There's buildings in flames, cars overturned, chaos. But somebody had taken a Sharpie, and they'd written across the face of the magazine 4 of the 5 W's of journalism. Who? Chris Zwolinski. What? Burns 40 acres of wilderness. Where? Cold Bay, Alaska. Why? Because the LA Lakers won the National Basketball Championship. Thank you very much.
Chris Zwolinski. All right. How are we doing on the fog? Is that okay? Is it too much? Talk amongst yourselves. More fog? Oh, okay. I can tell this is not going anywhere. All right. I just want to let you know, as a precaution, I did have all of the toilet paper removed from the bathrooms, in case you're worried about Chris burning down herring. Not going to happen. You're welcome. Enjoy intermission. Okay. Memories. Kayaking on Kayakuk River, 7 months pregnant, and flipped my kayak. What am I doing this for? Did it go okay? Is the baby all right? Oh, that was unenthusiastic. Yeah. The baby's all right. Running for Miss Alaska, USA. Okay. And the time I found car keys in the Dark Winter Nights parking lot. Oh, no, that's just an announcement. Someone lost their car keys in the parking lot. Anyone want to claim these? You're looking, oh, they were found by a Toyota Venza with a really big hairy dog inside. It's a Toyota. You good? All right, well, I got them. You're going to have to come up and get them for me, I guess. All right. I have always wondered why so many Alaskans enjoy torturing themselves outdoors. They'll tell me these horrific, and you get this too, like these horrific stories, this horrible hunt, this horrible hike, all that sort of stuff. And I don't get it, because generations of humans suffered so that we wouldn't have to do things like that. I feel like it's disrespectful to previous generations for me to be uncomfortable at any time. Well, our next storyteller did one better by getting tortured both from the outside by nature and from the inside. Please welcome to the stage Nick Janssen with a story we call Ultra Runners Anonymous.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Well, it's an honor to be here. Truly my pleasure. My name's Nick Janssen, and I suppose I'm here for 2 reasons. This is not a prop, by the way. I may just actually need water. One, because I offer a glimpse of ultra running and some endurance sports that take place right here in your backyard of Alaska. And 2, because I got a phone call from one of the board members of Dark Winter Nights about a year ago, thinking I was a different Nick in his phone. And one thing led to another. I volunteered to do this, and so now you got me for the next 15 minutes. Thank you. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I truly am addicted to ultra running. I really can't hold myself back, despite all the consequences. So things like patellar tendonitis, shin splints, chondromalacia, cortisone injections, these are now a regular part of my life. So Anyway, I've been, well, actually, I'd ran the numbers, and odds are that at least one of you in this audience has treated me for one of these ailments. They're better than even. So anyway, I've been a runner since my freshman year in high school, and running has always just been a source of stress relief and just the backbone of my healthy lifestyle. You may already see the irony here. But things didn't get out of control until I moved to Alaska in 2012 and kind of got mixed up with the wrong group. In 2013, I ran my first marathon, the gateway drug, Fairbanks' own Equinox. And so if there's some runners out here. For most runners and mortals like myself, you'll probably be on your feet for 3 to 5 hours when you're doing a marathon. The following year, in 2 years later, 15, I ran my first ultramarathon, and I ran a 50-miler. An ultramarathon's anything over 26.2, but I always thought that 50 miles was sort of the minimum distance deserving of that title. And so for a race like that, and for someone such as myself, you can expect to be moving continuously for about 8 to 12 hours. The following year, then, in 16, I ran the Resurrection Pass 100 down on the Kenai. And so I finished in just under 24 hours. I'm used to hearing some certain reactions like this, and every time I bring up these types of distances, I kind of get the same thing. And no, the Guinness Book of World Records is not knocking on my door about this. There are plenty of people that do this every year. In fact, something like 10,000 Americans do a 100-mile ultramarathon every year. So just for some perspective, this is about the same number of people who injure themselves with fireworks every year. So. Foolish idiots, I don't know. Don't they know they could get hurt? So anyway, what you're about to hear is a fairly unexceptional story in terms of if you're an athlete out there and you're used to doing these things, but you might find it mildly amusing. And if you're not, my intent is to offer you a glimpse into what this truly feels like and what it's like to run 100 miles through the mountains of Alaska in the wintertime. So, did Chris start another fire back there? So anyway, my story starts in 2017. Runners play this game where I was trying to see, many athletes play this game, what line can I cross that others are either unwilling or unable to do so. And so my goal after doing a 100-mile race was, well, can I do that in the winter in the mountains? And there's a race that happens right in our backyard if you're in Fairbanks. It happens 35 miles north of town. What is going on back there? You make me lose my train of thought. And so this race is called the White Mountains 100, and it starts at the Wickersham Dome trailhead, and it goes through just some beautiful country, and it goes from public use cabin to public use cabin where you have volunteers and aid stations, and those are placed about every 20 miles. Now, this was very well supported by Alaska standards, but by lower 48 standards, 100-mile race, you might have aid stations every 3 to 5 miles. And there's 3 categories that you can enter. There's fat tire bike, cross-country ski, or running. By far, most people sign up for the fat tire bike category, and that's usually the fastest group. There's the middle category of skiers, and then usually the runners are bringing up the rear. And there's usually the fewest of us at the end. But when you sign up for a specific category, you're really only competing within that category. So the fastest skier is not necessarily trying to compete with the fastest biker, the fastest runner is not competing with the fastest skier, et cetera. And it's not a guaranteed entry, so there's 84 slots, give or take, and you put your name in, and if your name gets drawn, then you have the privilege of paying $280 for the drudgery that comes to follow. And so I did that in 2017, was my first time, and I really wanted to run it, but I felt it was like a little bit too green at the time, so I put my name in for ski. And I thought this might be a way to tour the course and just gain some experience. Well, 3 days before the start of the race, I came down with a sinus infection that just put me on my back. It was one of the worst I've ever had. And I've never had COVID, but this was a terrible illness. And so I made this silly decision. You can see the pattern of addiction and silly decisions here, to just do the race anyway. And I don't have time to go into the details of it, but it probably could be its own story. I finished in a painfully slow and embarrassing 28 hours, not really impressing anybody with my time, but I really got out of the experience what I needed, which was a little bit of knowledge, a little experience, and some confidence that I think I'm ready to try running this thing. So in 2018, I put my name into the lottery again, and I got in again. So this time, the roster was posted, and I look at who are the other runners. These are the people I'm competing with. And there's returning champions Terry Buck and Christoph Teutscher, who each had more wins than I had finishes coming back. There was local ultra running legend Drew Harrington. Some of you might know him. And Drew was more experienced and faster than me, and I absolutely knew this. And then Patagonia-sponsored ultra runner Ty Draney, who I did a little stalking on, and he had an impressive resume. So I called my friend Drew up right away, and I said, it's a pretty intimidating-looking roster, but we have home field advantage, and so I think you might be able to beat these people. And so he agreed. I twisted his arm pretty hard, and so we did some training runs together. But mostly I trained on my own. So my preparation involved running to and from work, which is about 8 miles for me. And I really didn't want to give myself any kind of a temperature or condition cutoff, because I thought, as long as I just test all my systems and keep moving, this is going to be a good preparation for me. I also reached out to former champion Christoph Teutscher on Facebook, and he had absolutely no idea who I was. And I said, I just bombarded him with questions. What do you put on your feet? How do you keep your water from freezing? How much food do you bring? What clothes do you wear? All these things. And I'll never forget the response I got from him. He said, "You got in. That's great." Yeah, that was my reaction. So, nonetheless, I was a little deflated by that, but I thought, I'm going to beat you. And, no, I did not have that thought. Anyway, so then the pre-race meeting comes up, day before the race, and Drew Harrington is there. So I sit next to him and said, "All right, you ready? Are we gonna take him down?" And he said, "I'm sorry, I got some bad news for you. I think I have to switch to the ski." And so I was a little deflated at the time, but I thought, well, I understand. Drew's having a lot of health problems at the time, so I didn't hold anything against him, of course, and actually took the pressure off of us. I thought, we can just go out there and have a good time. So the next day, the race starts, and it's 8 a.m. start. It must have been 5 degrees, fairly breezy, and everybody's lining up at the Wickersham Dome trailhead, so you have bikes, skiers, runners, and when the gun goes off, everyone files into a 6-foot wide corridor, and it's absolute chaos. You have bumper-to-bumper fat tire bikes. You have skiers slashing their skis left and right, stabbing their poles. You have runners just like me, just trying to set their feet somewhere that's not going to cause a total log jam. If you step off the trail 1 foot in either direction, you go, I'm not exaggerating, you go up to your hips in the snow. But at some point, things start to thin out. So as a runner, you try to seed yourself towards the back because there's a lot of distance ahead of you, and everyone else is going faster than you. So I didn't really know quite where I was. But at some point, I get to the first checkpoint, and I'm alone. I'm alone most of the race, and most runners are. It's just you kind of space out a lot. There aren't many of you out there, and 100 miles is a long space. So the Moose Creek checkpoint, mile 18, I grab a handful of peanut M&Ms and fill up my water bottles and get back out on the trail, still feeling pretty good. At some point, I come across another runner who seems to be struggling a little bit, and I didn't quite know which one that was. But I passed him and offered him some words of encouragement, and he offered the same to me. But I didn't see him again. At some point, I roll into the Cache Mountain Cabin on mile 40. And, legs are hurting pretty good at this point. And Stan Justice is there making baked potatoes on the wood stove. Yeah. And so I was in heaven. I mean, there's just food galore. And Stan welcomes me, and he says, "Oh, the first runner's here." So I laughed at his humorous joke and just started, grabbing cookies, candy, crackers, chips, in one word, calories, into my face. And at some point I realized, he wasn't actually joking. I'm in the lead now, and all of these real runners have a target on my back. So now I got to do something. I got jam a couple cookies in my mouth, put my gloves back on, and get back out on the trail and down to business. So the next leg then takes you up to the Cache Mountain Divide. Now, the entire course has about 7,400 feet of elevation gain. So put things into perspective, that's 5 Empire State Buildings worth of vertical in addition to the horizontal distance. Empire State Building, I've never actually been there, and this is a Fairbanks group, so maybe I should use a different reference. I don't know how many Jimmy Huntington buildings that is, but you guys can run the math. Anyway, make it up the divide, and now the trail's deteriorating fairly significantly. It's been hours since the bikers have come through and packed things down, so drifting snow is starting to cover things up. It's getting harder to navigate. But then you reach a high point and you start coming back down to the Windy Gap cabin, and I'm still feeling pretty good. But this is about where the night shift starts, and so at this point now, the sun has gone down and temperatures drop pretty quickly. And so I get back out on the trail, and I have 20 miles to go before I get to Borealis Lefebvre cabin. And truthfully, I have a lot of really pleasant memories in that range. I felt strong. I got into this rhythm, this 180 beat per minute, this step rhythm, and I didn't bring a temperature gauge or a thermometer with me or anything like that, but if you're a runner and you run in the winter, you get pretty good at estimating the temperature. It's just based on things like where does the sweat freeze on your jacket and how does it brush off, and if you bite into a Snickers bar, how hard is it to break off and how many teeth do you break? Things like that. And so my best estimate was at the coldest point, which is where you get down into the bottom of Beaver Creek. It was probably about 30 below. And the problem when it's that cold and you're pretty isolated is that you really can't shut your system down too long. You can't stop the engine from running, or you're soaking wet from sweat. And so if you stop for in my case, a minute and a half, the night sky will just suck your heat away, and you'll start shivering. And for me, my hands will be cold for the next hour. So it makes it very hard to eat, makes it hard to relieve yourself. But if you just keep moving and stay in this rhythm, it actually feels pretty good. I remember there was a moment when I turned my headlamp out and the aurora was so bright that it was casting a shadow on the trail, and I could pretty much just run by the light of the aurora. So I'll never forget that. But I make it to the Borealis checkpoint, mile 80, and I had caught up with Drew on his skis. And I looked him right in the eye and I said, "Hey, Drew." And he looked right through me like he had never seen me before. So I think it was just, it's 2 a.m., he'd been going for however many hours, and, exhaustion becomes all of us. But I did talk to him like weeks after that event, and he never remembered me catching up with him. It's a pretty somber tone in the Borealis cabin because volunteers are just trying to get sleep. The few racers may have dropped, and they're just trying to get sleep. People are shivering in sleeping bags, soaking wet, just trying to get food down. Nobody's talking. It's candlelit. But at some point, this second place guy caught up with me there, and I thought, well, this is it. He took me down. I don't have the lead anymore. But I got back out on the trail as soon as I could, and that next 20 miles, I looked over my shoulder constantly. I was always just hearing voices and seeing headlamps in the distance. And at some point, I crossed the finish line. No one had passed me. First place in my age group. So I was completely ecstatic, shocked. And thank you. The sun had come up, by the way, so it was this moment. And of course, the reason I feel comfortable telling you guys all this is because the next scene is going to make me look like a complete failure idiot. So what happens when you win your division is you get automatic entry into next year's race. You don't have to go through the lottery process. I already hear people laughing. Yeah, I should have quit while I was ahead. And so in 2019, I used my automatic entry to try to run it again. Now, if you're a runner, you know that one of the more important decisions you can make is what you eat before the race, because you're going to carry it around in your stomach the entire time. For a marathon that's 3 to 5 hours, it's just going to jostle around for a little while. But if you're running for 24 hours, it's going to be jostling a long while. So my wife, who's here this evening, she offered to make me whatever I wanted for dinner. And I looked around in the fridge, found a few things, and I'm like, well, you know what? The salmon, I think, is a good choice. It's a slow burn, Alaskan salmon, Alaska race. This is going to nourish me to the finish line. How perfect. So my wife, who was in a bit of a hypochondriac phase, actually fairly strong hypochondriac phase at the time, she said, I think that's been in there quite a while. Are you sure that that's okay? Now, you guys see where this is going, but I assure you, you'd be wrong. When you live with a hypochondriac, you're used to just kind of quelling those concerns reflexively, as I did that evening. But anyway, she cooked it up, and we both ate it. Well, the next morning, I got up, and I was feeling pretty good. Wasn't hungry, so I didn't eat breakfast, and she drove me to the start. we start the race again, and I get on the trail, and I'm feeling pretty good. I'm running with the mid-pack of the skiers, so slightly ahead of where I was last year. I get to the first checkpoint, and nothing's really looking good, so I listened to my stomach, and I just drank water. Pushed on to the next checkpoint, and this is the one now at Cache Mountain where you have a full spread of food. And I thought, well, this is my favorite. I'm going to indulge, but my stomach was just still telling me, like, don't eat. It's just, you're not going to keep it down, so why bother? So again, I didn't eat. I just drank some water, and I pushed on now up the divide, back down to Windy Gap, and by the time I get to Windy Gap, this is mile 60, I knew something was wrong. And I still hadn't eaten anything all day, and the sun was starting to go down. And the second place guy catches up with me, this guy from Spain, a really nice guy. At some point, we decided we'll go out on the night shift together and run, because it can be pretty lonely out there. And so we ran about 5 miles together. And at some point, I said, I think I'm slowing you down. I'm holding you back. I think you should just go. And so he did. He cleared off. And so I was back to being alone again. And all of a sudden, it's like I hit a wall. I mean, this didn't happen gradually, but all the muscles that I had from the waist down stopped working. My joints seized up. I just found myself really unable to move. And the only thing that I could really do was sort of use my trekking poles and kind of fall into them and do this sort of Frankenstein walk. And there was a few moments where I got so tired I couldn't do it anymore, and I just kind of stopped and just kind of screamed some obscenities into the sky, and just wondering, like, what is happening? I didn't think about my stomach a whole lot. I really thought about, well, this is only the third time I've really done a distance like this. This is just what sometimes happens, because it's a lot to bite off. And so I make it to the Borealis cabin under my own power, but barely, by the skin of my teeth. I felt like it got a little survival-y. But I got there, and I laid down, and I set my alarm for 30 minutes. I'm like, I'll just get up in 30 minutes and see if I can see what I feel. Well, 30 minutes go by, and I wake up, and I feel worse. So I guess I need some more rest. I do that again, set my alarm for 30 minutes, wake up, and I feel worse again. And at some point, it dawns on me that I don't have the ability to get myself out of this. Like, I'm going to have to rely on some help. And so the idea of scratching from a race like this, there's many reasons why you wouldn't want to. I mean, not just the least of which is the $200 rescue fee you have to pay. Just the embarrassment of, that you scratched, you couldn't finish. But really the biggest one being, I put myself in a situation where I had to rely on somebody else to extricate me from the situation. I felt like that was irresponsible. But I didn't really have a choice. So I took the next snow machine ride that was offered to me, which was about 6 hours later, and I completely bundled me up. And on the ride back to the trailhead, I threw up several times all over the side of the trail. I felt awful. And I get to the parking lot where my wife is waiting for me, and she knew I was overdue and had been following me on the GPS tracker. And she said, "What happened? You look terrible." And I could barely move, and so I kind of went over the story with her. And she says, "Well, it sounds like you need to eat something." And I said, "I cannot eat anything." And she says, "Well, I wonder if that salmon was bad." She says, "I was on the couch all day yesterday. I couldn't get off the couch. I was so sick. I think that salmon was bad." And I said, "No, trust me, sweetie, this was in your head. It's a stomach ache. It's just fine. You imagined it, okay? Everybody has stomach aches. These happen every day. You're not going to die. Everything is fine." Now, we probably would never know which one of us was right, whether that salmon was bad or not, if I hadn't done the thing that I did the next day. Here's how convinced I was that I was right. I have to go to work the next day, so I bring my lunch with me. So I reach in the fridge. Yeah, that same salmon is in there. It's fine. It's fine. So I grab the salmon, I bring it to work with me, I heat it up in the microwave for lunch, and I eat it. And this time, within an hour and a half, it's like a freight train came through me. I couldn't even sit at my desk. I told my boss, I have to go home. And so I went home and spent several hours in the fetal position. And so I think we had our answer. So there's probably a lot of lessons to be learned here. So let's go over them. 1, listen to your wife. 2, don't eat fish before a 100-mile ultramarathon. And 3, don't run a 100-mile ultramarathon. Thank you.
Nick Janssen, I saw you all were with me. We were all equally horrified. The most horrifying part of that story, when he microwaves the fish at work. You should know, that's not, you don't do that. That's a rule. Okay, some memories. My sister moved to a tropical island. I went to visit her, and in the microclimate where she lived, it was so sticky. You wake up covered with moisture. Walk around and rivulets run down your back. You go to bed wet. One time I spoke out loud, how do people even live here? Then I moved to Fairbanks. And at the time, I thought it was only temporary. I was waiting for the bus at minus 30 degrees, trying to see the bus coming through the ice fog, and I found myself saying out loud, how do people even live here? And I heard in my own brain the echo. Well, there you go. As the Super Cub flew away and I realized I was the only one on the glacier, I wondered, what the heck am I doing here? I was asked by a friend to be an additional chaperone for a group of kids going on a snowshoe hike. I didn't have much experience, but I said yes. At the last minute, somebody brought along a dog sled and a very small team. Before the afternoon was over, I only barely read these before I do it. 3 children were injured. 3? You're like, first 2 were like, I don't know, you might be able to figure this out. And the organizer took them out from the hike on the dog sled, leaving me alone with the kids. As it got dark, I realized we were lost. And I thought, how the heck did I get here? They were all crying, but the moon came out, common sense and a calm head prevailed, and I'm here tonight to share this memory. But where are the kids? Still lost. Well, moms are great, aren't they? Often they are the voice of reason and tranquility in an otherwise chaotic family. On rare occasions, however, they themselves are the chaos. And I'm going to interview Putt Clark next about her legendary mother for a story we call Mining for Teeth. Made it. For those of you who are wondering, like, why doesn't he take the guitar off? Because the cord is going into my pocket for the mic, and I don't know how to do it, so I'm just gonna wear it. Would you like a soundtrack?
A soundtrack?
Yeah, would you like a soundtrack?
Oh, so you have controls here.
Yeah, so I can. Are we unmuted? Anyone recognize that? Last Christmas I gave you. All right, Putt. So your story begins in 1967. What happened in 1967?
So I was born.
Cool.
And I was born to a very large and strong woman, Nijah Clark.
All right.
And this was in Petersburg, Alaska, not Petersburg, Virginia. And my mom, she used to like to get out on the beach with her good drinking buddy friend, Nijah. And the two of them would each pack their own personal jugs, gallon jugs of wine, and get out on the beach and turn us kids loose. My brother, who's 4.5 years older than me, I like to say 5, but And then I was just a baby. And so I'd go out crawling around, making buzzing sounds, and Nijah, who was wise and inebriated, she pointed out to my mom, she said, "You know, Madge, she's really not an Elizabeth. You should call her Putt." And Mom thought that was a pretty good idea. So it stuck.
Because of motors, like outboard motors is what you were named
motors,
after? They're always going putt, 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 putt,
because
putt, putt, putt.
outboard motors make that buzzing sound. Yeah.
All right. And who all was in your family? So you had your brother, and then you also had your dad, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, my brother and so at some point my mom decided, okay, that's it, leaving Dad, and she was going to move north to Fairbanks. And so she wanted to go back to school. She had her English degree, and she wanted to get her teaching certificate, so she enrolled at UAF. And in the move up here, we were pretty broke. We were living in the tailings off of Gold Hill by Parks Highway, and we lived in there in a tent until into October. And she finally found this little place off of Gold Hill, and it was a shabin.
For those of us who don't know what a shabin is, how would you define that?
Yeah, a Wanigan trailer or a Wanigan shack attached to an Airstream trailer. And that became our home for the next 13 years. And of course, it was a dry cabin or a dry shabin.
Was it dry or did it leak too?
Oh, well, there were leaks too.
Okay, but it was dry in the sense if you didn't have running water. And then so she went on to teach at West Valley and was very well liked there. But she still continued some of her, you might say, eccentric ways while she was here, right?
Yeah, well, one of the things that she really enjoyed doing was feeding a moose. There was a moose that came around our property, and this was the 70s. There were no ordinances about feeding moose or anything like that. And this little moose who was orphaned was missing an eye. She was feeding it, and at some point, this was not much after we'd moved up here, so like 69, she was out driving, doing some last-minute Christmas shopping, and she went through a yellow red light, just slid right through the intersection, and a cop stopped her and gave her a ticket. And she ended up going to the magistrate and saying, well, I can't pay this, and can I just work it off? And they said, sure, work at the nursing home, but they didn't keep track of her hours, so she ended up going back to the magistrate and saying, well, can I do community service by just feeding this moose? And so that's what she did.
So you just had a wild moose hanging around your property all the time. What was that like?
Terrifying.
Why?
Well, she was everywhere. You know, when you're a kid.
Well, what was so the moose had a name, right? It was
Yes.
a female. What was her name again?
Dulcinea.
Dulcinea.
Yeah.
All right.
Dulcinea, named after the sweet girl in the novel Don Quixote. So, yeah.
But she was far from sweet, unfortunately.
She was far from sweet. Yeah, she was a little bit ornery. There was one time Mom was out carving up vegetables for the moose, and she had this carrot in her hand. Everything's frozen because everything came to Fairbanks frozen at that time. And she's out there carving it up, and the moose gets impatient, starts stamping her feet, and she lifts up one of her hoofs and lets it drop on Mom's head. And Mom, she wasn't going to take that. Like I said, she was a large and strong woman. So she just whacked the moose across the face. And the moose jumped back because she realized who the alpha moose was at that point. Yeah.
And I understand your mom also had a bit of a green thumb.
Yes. She liked to grow a garden. She did like to also supplement what she grew in the garden. She grew weed.
Like the other kind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not weeds, but
But she
weed.
didn't particularly partake herself, right? Why was she growing it if she wasn't enjoying it?
She did it to thumb her nose at the government. It was kind of an attitude issue.
Yeah, she was right, wasn't she? It was proven right.
And so she had her big section of the garden that was, she was growing pot. And at some point, she took my brother under the fold, too. And the two of them were growing pot in the garden.
It's important to share hobbies with your children. It makes permanent memories. But she never used it, so what did she do with it?
She gave it away to her friends.
So this is like Christmas presents and stuff,
yeah,
right?
Christmas presents.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That must have been some fun, interesting Christmas mornings with a lot of explaining to do. But then she also had an interesting way about gardening. It wasn't just what she grew, it was how she grew it, right?
How she grew it, yeah. She became kind of a main stop, apparently, at some point for the tour buses. There were tour buses that went up the old road, and which was called Old Nana at that time. And she would be outside gardening naked. And she was, like I said, a rather large woman. So she was quite a sight.
Has anyone here done that? It feels like bad naked for those of you who are Seinfeld fans. Like, bumblebees can be curious sometimes. I don't know that I would be comfortable with that. And then, so her philosophy of parenting was kind of like, you'll figure it out,
Yeah,
more or less. What did your brother figure out in this process?
Well, yeah, we were feral, and and I would say my brother Tom had to set the precedence of how you do things, which I learned how not to do things from that. But yeah, he had some fires. There were a few fires that happened. He set, unfortunately, I can't say he set his fort on fire, but it did catch on fire at one point, and we had to put it out. We had jugs of water that we had to try to put the fire out. The fire department came. There was another time that he was going through a pyromania phase when we were younger of it reminded me of Chris's story a little bit.
Oh, that's interesting.
And, throwing matches on the dry grass and then trying to get me to stomp it out. And I would scream, ah, and I'd run away. And so he would try to stomp it out. But one time it got out of hand and it caught the willow patch on fire.
All right.
Yeah.
And then he also, he had a little trouble at school in first grade, from what I recall, too, that he wasn't getting along with his teacher super well. What was that about?
Well, it turned out that he had discovered Mom's stash of beer. And he discovered he really liked beer.
And I mean, first grade, we're talking like age 6 to 7, all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so how did that go for him?
The teacher didn't much like him. And so Mom, when she went for her parent-teacher conference, she was informed that the teacher really did not like him. And then she found out why.
And it was because he was getting sloshed before school?
Before school.
He was showing up to school
Yeah.
inebriated.
Yeah.
Which takes, at the one point, you got to be like, he got up early for that. I think... let's recognize where some kudos are.
But I got him beat on this.
Okay.
Yeah, I apparently was taking to finishing off people's wine glasses when I was a baby.
Oh.
Yeah, at the
Awesome.
parties.
All right,
I'd
good.
clean up everybody's wine glasses.
Well, there you go. That's
Yeah.
starving children somewhere, so we got to appreciate what we have. One of my favorite stories about your mom, which I feel like is just very Alaskan, is when they paved Gold Hill Road. She had a problem with that because it was gravel. What was her problem with that?
Yeah, people started driving way too fast, and she didn't like it. And being the antagonistic kind of person she was, she called up DOT and said, you got to do something about this. Put up some speed signs, something.
A child might get hurt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be bad.
And we were always out running around in the road, too. So.
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah.
But
so
DOT wasn't helping.
No, they
At
weren't
least not to
helping.
her satisfaction.
No. And so she called them up and threatened them, that chip seal is pretty pliant. I've found that we can roll it right up, just like a rug. And we'll just roll up your road and get rid of it. And they got pretty upset about that. They said, no, we'll take care of it, which they never did. So finally, Mom got a gang of friends and us, and we all went out at some midnight hour and stole some signs from elsewhere, some speed signs.
Some speed signs.
Yeah.
Just
yeah.
rehomed some street
Rehomed
behind.
some speed signs, except one of them was one number and the other was a different number.
So wait, it was like 40 going one way, but 35 coming back?
Exactly. Yeah.
People are like, why does it always take me so much longer to get home? What am I doing wrong? All right, so on top of that, she was known for her own special sort of brew, right? She had a special mix.
Yeah.
She was sort of a
Yeah.
mixologist before that was a thing.
Yeah, mixologist. Yeah, she loved people. She loved parties. She loved just having a big event. And two of her favorite parties were the solstice parties, but her most favorite was the Christmas party, this winter solstice. And her favorite brew to whip up for everybody was something called Stump Splitter. A pretty terrible concoction of many spirits, a little orange juice, but the essential ingredient was Everclear.
I grew up a good Christian boy. I don't even know what you're talking about, but I assume that's strong stuff. Okay. Anyway, so this was effective to the point where you had a pretty exciting Christmas season that was somewhat sparked. Okay, fine, like a week. I don't know. It was a day. It was a day in the Christmas. Boy, we're getting like feedback from the audience now. Season. You had a fun couple hours one day in the approximation of time before Christmas. What happened with that? You want to do this? This isn't easy. I got this guitar. I'm trying not to accidentally push any buttons.
So
what happened?
Yeah, one Christmas in particular, Mom had whipped up her batch of Stump Splitter for the party, and she had lots of other things to drink too. There was spiced wine and probably other just random alcohol hanging around. And people had the tendency to leave the party and end up in ditches, and actually we'd wake up in
That's not funny, people. That's a serious thing.
And we'd wake up some mornings and there'd be a whole fleet of people that are sleeping on the floor. There was a lot of action going on. But this one night, her friend Dave, he'd had too much Stump Splitter. Oh, and one of the details I forgot to mention is that my mom had a tradition of lighting candles on the tree, which we continue to do.
Awesome combination.
Yeah.
I must have just felt like a wonderful Christmas season to have lit candles on like the whole season. I bet was fun. All of it. Anyway, so now you got a bunch of people drinking Stump Splitter, open flames next to an extremely dry shrubbery.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was.
Sounds like a recipe for something fun.
Yeah, we tended to have a forest of trees. Mom liked to go out and get the black spruce, and I think those things are probably especially flammable. I don't know. But anyway, Dave, he'd been wobbling around, had too much Stump Splitter, and sure enough, he fell into the lit tree. And he
Now that is funny. You can laugh at that. There's nothing wrong with that.
It's okay. It was just Dave.
He's all right. He's fine. Just Dave.
It's just Dave. So yeah, his arm caught fire, but fortunately he was drunk enough that he just fell and he rolled around and the fire got extinguished. People threw their Stump Splitter on him. And so Dave was fine, but Mom realized after that she really needed to keep a fire extinguisher nearby. So.
All right, and then to wrap up here with what is, your mom sort of had a problem with her own concoction. It came back to haunt her, the stump splitter on one particular evening, right?
Yeah, that was a summer solstice party, and it was, Mom had just a wild time the night before and drank way too much stump splitter. And that following morning, she was nursing a terrible hangover. And our father was visiting us from Nome, and he was being a very dutiful, good, helpful ex-husband and helping her out with that by taking all those buckets of barf out to the outhouse. And you just do bucket after bucket. Oh, take that bucket out. And at some point, Mom, she came out of her stupor, and she was feeling around in her mouth and was like, where's my false tooth? And Dad was like, well, I don't know. I've just been dumping these buckets of barf out in the outhouse. And she realized what had happened. Oh my gosh, there was no way she was going to go out and buy a new one. That's way too much money. So.
And she couldn't live without it because
it was right.
It was right one of the front ones that people judge you a little bit on.
Yeah. Yep.
They call it the social 16. Have you heard about that? You gotta have all 16. Sorry.
And she already had a sizable gap, so between her front teeth, so that, it was too much. So there was no other way about it. We were gonna have to go out there and get that tooth. So she enlisted us, and I don't remember if there were other people, but she probably hauled some other people in on the job too. And, come on in for a fun, rousing time of looking for the tooth down the outhouse. And so Mom had kept birds, and she had a bird cage that had like this metal mesh on the bottom. And we got buckets, and we got jugs of water and shovels. And I don't know how we managed to scoop the poop out of there, but we shoved the buckets down, maybe with shovels, pulled them out with a rope, and poured the poo into the bird cage thing, and then poured water all over it, shoving it around, looking for the tooth. And it was surprising how far down that tooth went.
And and you're like about 7 or 8 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And this didn't strike you as a particularly odd thing.
No.
No.
No, it seemed perfectly normal.
It's just like archaeology. Like, this is how they find dinosaur teeth. This is how they find human teeth, too. I remember you saying that you were surprised by the life at the bottom of the outhouse. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was kind of surprising. As we dug down and the walls were getting revealed on the sides of the outhouse, you could see all these squiggly little larvae nesting all around the outhouse. Yeah.
And you were scooping them up too?
Yeah, inevitably they were coming up too.
So you're like filtering through
larvae,
poop, vomit,
and poo.
and maggots. Yeah. All right, if there are any kids here, the next time your parents ask you to do a chore and you're like, I don't want to. But we're all, I'm sure, on the edges of our seats now already. Want to know, did you find the tooth?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. And did she use it again?
She did. I don't know what she did to sterilize it, or if she did, actually. But she wore that tooth until the day she died.
Yeah, and so I'd like to end this with, because when I met you, I was like, you seem extremely normal, considering. The more I heard about you, I was like, why, what? So how do you feel like, do you see ways that your mom has shaped who you are today?
I really learned how to keep my head down. I think that probably going through all of that made me realize, like, there's some parts of her that I really appreciate, that I see in myself, a certain rebelliousness and maybe being contrary. And ironically, the rebellion backfired on her because at some point I was deciding, that's it, I'm gonna be a square. I'll show you. But then I finally grew out of that, and I learned how to party, so.
All right. And is your mom still with us, or what?
No, she
Okay.
passed away in '94, and we were all gathered around, my brother, his wife, and my newlywed husband, and she was taking her final breaths, and suddenly I was seized with this urge to communicate with her some important information, and this probably comes from a shared irreverent sense of humor, but I had to let her know that her tooth, that we were gonna throw it down the outhouse hole for her.
Putt Clark, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful job. I'll take that from you. All right, it's time for intermission. Enjoy your potatoes from Hutchison Academica. Make sure to turn in those audience storyteller sheets. We'll pick a storyteller in the second half. If you got more memories, turn those in as well. And look for Molly Denali. She'll bring you in at the end of 15 minutes. No, we're not starting. We're not starting yet. Apparently, I just come out to make a brief announcement. Apparently, removing the toilet paper from the bathroom was a bad idea. We have some huge lines, and so I'm a very timely person. Normally, it's like 15 minutes, but because there's huge lines at the bathroom, and I guess at the potato stand too, we're gonna hold off. So I hope you're enjoying talking to each other. If you want, I could do a little more of this, but. Oh, really? You really want? I assumed you'd say no. Oh, now I walked into it. Okay, well, while they look for an alternative to toilet paper, I will play what I don't know. I'm gonna try and play. This is completely, the rest of this is basically like a shuttle launch. It's carefully programmed to the millisecond. This is not. So, well, okay, we got Stairway to Heaven. Nope, don't know how to play that. I've had a request for Funky Town, and trust me, you do not want to witness my process of learning a new song. But next time, Funky Town, I promise. Could someone help me, like... That's pretty much it, I think. That's pretty close. There you go. But I think I remember most of Jump, so would you like to try and sing Jump along with me? I have a backing track, but I don't have a way to play it through the speakers, so I'm just going to put my phone next to the microphone. So we're going to improvise, all right? This is history being made. I want you all to know, oh, dude, Molly's here. Wait, that means we're like close to done. All right, well, now I feel like I built up to something. I started talking, and now people don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. It went away. All right. All right. It's a short song. All right, we're going to try this. I don't know. Do you guys know what a backing track is? Have you ever heard of what a backing track is before? It's when you don't have any friends, and so your phone is like the entire rest of the band, and you can just be the one instrument playing on your sofa while you're watching Tiger King during COVID. All right, so Barron's running sound for us tonight. Let's have a round of applause for Barron. Is he even there? Oh, there he is. Okay, all right. All right, Barron, we didn't rehearse this. This is a 4-minute song with a long instrumental. I don't know what I'm going to do for that. But good luck on the audio for this. We're going to give it a shot. Let me figure out what's the best instrument here. I think we'll go with trumpet again. Okay. I think you get the idea. It just kind of goes on from there. For those of you who haven't been to this event before, we have legit gone 100% off the rails right now. Which is why Molly of Denali is thrilled to hear her name called. Come on out, Molly of Denali. Along with Yadabe Evans, who is the creative producer for Molly of Denali. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out. Now, I understand Molly, unfortunately, is suffering a tad bit of laryngitis, so she's not able to talk tonight. Thank you. But Yadabe is here, and can you tell us a little bit about the backstory of Molly of Denali and what's going on with that for folks who maybe aren't familiar with it?
Sure. So Molly of Denali got started in 2016, and it's the very first show to feature an Indigenous lead character. And yes. Prior to Molly, there was only 1% of all characters on television that were Indigenous. So it's a groundbreaking television series. And the lead character, Molly, is played by Sovereign Bill, who is Tlingit and Muckleshoot.
Wow, that's awesome. And this is on public television throughout the United States and Canada as well?
Yes, as well as you can stream it online, check it out on pbs.org, the Molly of Denali channel, YouTube.
And I understand it's been going very well. You all have been nominated for some impressive things, right? Okay, Molly's on there. Like, okay, what can you make? Molly, can you make a shape of what you've been nominated for? Oh, very good. Anyone? Emmy! Yeah, tell us about that.
It's been so awesome. We've been recently nominated for 2 award-winning Emmys, and we'll find out if we have won those nominations coming up in December, so really quickly.
Molly, I'm still proud of you. Even if you don't win, you're still a winner in my heart. And if folks want to check out Molly of Denali, where can they watch it here in town?
You can watch it on KUAC, channel 9.1. And again, also on streaming, we have new episodes that just aired November 7th. And all throughout November, we have great RTLs, which are ready to learn, shorts. And it features at the very end, The Big Gathering, which is Alaska Federation of Natives.
Awesome. And it's 2 p.m. weekdays, right, for the kids?
6 a.m. and 2 p.m. It airs twice every day.
All right, so for those kids who are getting up early, you still catch the little Molly Denali. All right. Molly, understand that you are bringing out the audience storyteller name. We actually got one. Who is it here? Okay. All right, I'll read that in a second. First of all, thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you, Molly. Congratulations. Thanks for representing Alaska so well. I have to say, it's really convenient her name rhymes with Denali. Like, that worked out really well for her. Like, imagine if she'd been born like a Gary, you know? What kid's going to watch Gary from Gary? I don't know. Apparently a lot of people from Gary, Indiana here. I thought it was funny. And now I'm going to get emails tomorrow. All right, audience storyteller, you remember the rules? Doesn't matter, it's too late. So when I read your name, please come up over here to your left and meet with Brittany. Nijah Steinkruger. Come on down. All right, come on up over this side here. And while she's working her way up, we already know our next event is going to be March 4th at 7 p.m. I will practice. Oh, submit your song requests at facebook.com/darkwinternights. Why don't we just do a night of that? I don't know. And tickets will go on sale as soon as I get that link up on the website. You can also subscribe to our e-newsletter if you would like to stay in touch on all of our updates. Okay, come on out. Nijah. Am I in the ballpark of pronouncing that right?
Yeah, good
Oh, wow,
work.
good. Okay. Go
Good
ahead.
work.
Here. All right, so you're going to have a seat there?
I am.
Okay. Can everyone see her okay? Yeah. Well, of course, you guys can.
I came to Alaska in the fall of 1975, and I was a baby lawyer. And then when I stopped working, I'd spent 19 years as a Superior Court judge. And my favorite thing to do, or one of my favorite things to do, was arraignments. And that's when people make their first appearance in court. And I especially liked going and doing the magistrate's job if I could get it. Because then at 1:30 every day, because then you found out what happened last night when you were sleeping. And all you had to, and people are on the video from the jail, and all you have to say is, and then what happened? So I really like doing arraignments, and I like doing jury selection. So one day, it's a Friday afternoon, we're in the new courthouse. I think we moved over there in about 2002, maybe. And I'd been involved for whatever it was, 7 years building it. I knew everything from the knobs on the cabinets to the length of the clerk's bench. You know, we'd worked hard. So it was a Friday afternoon, and Friday afternoons can be a little looser sometimes. And I was doing felony arraignments, which meant that these were people that had been indicted by a grand jury, and they were what we call the out of custody felony arraignments, which means they weren't in jail. So we start up, and I think it's about 2:30 or something, and there's a DA at one table. Many of you knew him, or know him, Jay Hodges. And there were some public defenders and others roaming around in the back. And my sharp eyes detected that there was a guy in a wheelchair. And I thought, okay, let's deal with that first. So I ask him to roll up, and when he gets close and he's there at the table all by himself, I know who it is. It's Lewd Louie. The public defenders called him Lewd Louie, and he was in a wheelchair. And there are no troopers or anything like that because everybody's out of custody. And Lewd Louie kind of starts mumbling and talking, and pretty soon I hear these words. So just out in the hall, I took a full container of rat poison. And I say, did you say you took a full container of rat poison? He said, yes. Why? I said. He said, I don't want to go back to jail. I said, oh, how big is a full container? Holds it about like this. I say, how did you swallow it? With water. So, you know, I decided there could be some truth to this. The courtroom has gone suddenly silent. Jay Hodges has sat back down in his chair and pushed himself back to watch. So I hit this button we have that I won't tell you all the details of, but this button alerts the troopers down on the lowest level to heads up on those cameras that are up there. And so I hit the button, and of course they have no idea what's going on, but I start having a conversation with Louie, and I say, so Louie, how about if I read the indictment here with what you're charged with? Buying a little time. And then we'll deal with the rat poison that you've swallowed before you came in the courtroom, knowing that the troopers would be hearing this. Because we don't want to cause a big scene. So I read it, and about that time, trooper comes through the back door, one comes off the elevator, one comes in another door. They're all standing there. And I say, would you please take Louie out of here right away, because I don't want him throwing up on the new carpet. I'm gonna be really mad. And they take Louie out, and I can hear the siren coming, you know, with the ambulance and the police, and they're all coming. Everybody in the courtrooms, I'm like, who wants to be next? And we quickly finish up. Well, the next day, Monday morning, there he is on my calendar again. He's telephonic from the hospital. So I say, how you doing? He says, because of you, they pumped my stomach. I said, and what did they find? The rat poison. I said, yes. And he said, and somebody set my bail and raised my bail to $100,000. I said, yes. He said, do you know who that was? I said, yes. It was me. He said, I want a bail hearing. I said, I'll set that on for next week.
Nijah Steinkruger. All right, some more of your memories. When a kid I babysat walked in from the outhouse and told me her cheeks froze to the seat. Thanks for putting your name on that, Rebecca. So now we know. It's a small town. I bet we can triangulate who that was. Getting into, I want to hear the end of, like, how do they get themselves off? Like, talk about, anyway, getting into and trying to start the wrong Subaru, not once, but twice. So many Foresters. I drive a Forester, too. If you get in the DeLorean and try and start it, you got no excuses there. We had a moose fall through the roof. Okay, we had a moose fall through the roof of our root cellar. Oh, okay. And spent the day getting it out. Then it ran through the woods across the road and got hit by a car. Oh, got you with that one, isn't it? It was like, oh, it's a happy ending. No, it's not. Well, I recently found out that there is an unspoken evil force that lives up here in Alaska. And it is not Bigfoot. Bigfoot is just annoyed because we gave him such a horrible name. That's why he's a little bit aloof. I don't know if you saw this. He recently started a change.org campaign to try and get us to call him something different. He already got a celebrity endorsement from Mr. Potato Head. And that's the dad joke of tonight. Thanks, everybody, for that sympathy laugh. Our next storyteller will tell us about the actual unspoken evil force that's up here in Alaska. Please welcome Kevin Breitenbach with a story we call The Blowhole.
Not the bass kid.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that introduction. It was entirely correct. So I moved up to here to Alaska about 20 years ago to go to school at UAF. I came up here with an old Toyota pickup truck, kind of a pair of skis and a mountain bike. And going to school part-time and working part-time, I quickly found out I have no money to use those skis and I have no money to put gas in that truck. So I found myself riding a bike around basically everywhere. Now at this time, I had no love for bikes, but for years up here, I found myself poor and a bike really kind of alleviates that. So years pass by and I find myself riding everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's to work or to school or to Fred Meyer's. I was on a bike. And a number of years go by and I start hearing of these things, these ultra endurance marathons that Nick was talking about earlier. And you know, winter would come around and it's a surprisingly nice time to ride a bike in the interior of Alaska. So I had no love for riding bikes. I really had no love for racing either. But I found myself kind of heading out and doing these ultra-endurance marathons, maybe back in 2008, 2009. Fat bikes start coming around and things become more popular. And I really kind of fell into that crowd, that wrong crowd that Nick was talking about. And I started hearing about this other race. So these were 100-mile races. Now I start hearing there's this other race along the Iditarod Trail called the Iditarod Trail Invitational. And that's not 100 miles. There's a couple different versions of that. There's one that'll go about like 310 miles to the village of McGrath along the Kuskokwim River. And then there's another version of it that goes the full 1,000 miles to Nome. So in 2013 through 2015, I got kind of wrapped up with this race, and I started racing to McGrath. And I found it so cool that I had discovered this 300-mile section of Alaska that I really started to understand. And I realized right then, I want to figure out this other 700 miles on the other end of things. So I did this race for a few years to McGrath, and by about 2017, I realized I really wanted to go to Nome, so I started looking into things to go to Nome, and there's this one section of trail that really stood out, and I had heard from other people about this section of trail. Just really right at the very end, really close to Nome, there's this spot called the Blowhole. And all I knew was that nobody stops in the Blowhole. So let me tell you a little bit story about why nobody stops in the Blowhole. 2017 rolls around. I got my family's support to go and do this silly event all the way to Nome. You see, just going to McGrath is like a 2 or 3 day commitment. Going all the way to Nome is like a 2 or 3 week commitment. So my wife and my kids were all behind it, and I spend the springtime just getting ready for this race. And I go down to Fred Meyer's and I buy all this terrible junk food and I bring it home and I hide it because I've got 2 small children. And when they go to bed at night, I would take all that food out and I would pack it up and I'd put it in these flat rate shipping boxes and I'd ship them out to every village along the trail because that's how you supply yourself with any food. The last week in February comes around when the Iditarod Trail Invitational starts, and there's 100 of us line up on the trail start, and we head on down the trail. 2017, I made it 15 days and 700 miles. I made it to Unalakleet, and that's right on the Bering Sea coast. And I got there, and I was exhausted, and I was sick, and I was tired, and I felt like a little kid that was looking at the deep end of the pool, and I tried to, like, swim out a little bit, and I realized, like, nah. And I turned around, and I made it back to the edge of the pool, and I went home to Fairbanks. Like, I did not get the Bering Sea coast. I've been here for 20 years, but the coast didn't make any sense to me. So I knew in my heart of hearts that I was going to have to go home and convince my wife and family again that next year, 2018, is going to be the year for me. And I was fortunate enough that my wife and my kids, they were all behind it. So I did the same things. I bought the food. I hid the food. I packed the food. I shipped the food. And the last weekend of February comes around, and there's 100 of us on the start of the Iditarod Trail, and we head on down. Now, in 2017, I realized there's if you try to go all the way to Nome, you get to experience 2 different trails, like 2 entirely different trails. The start of it you see the sled dog race, I guess I should say. The sled dog race starts just 1 week after all of these bikers, skiers, and runners head out on the trail. And you head down the first part of the trail, and it's quiet. It's lonely. It's wilderness. The trail's unmarked. Maybe it gets blown in, and every village you go through is just quiet. There's not much going on. But in 2017, I realized eventually the sled dog race catches up with you because they're just going faster. You know, maybe on a bike we'll cover 50 or 100 miles a day, but sled dogs are doing 100, 150 miles a day. So by a week in, 2 weeks in, the sled dog races start catching you, and certainly by the time you're to the Bering Sea coast, that sled dog race is up with you. The first thing you see is there's going to be the trail breakers coming through, these giant snow machines, and they're just going to lay down wooden trail markers the whole way to Nome. And so suddenly the trail is empty, and now it's just clearly marked all the way. Then after that, you've got the lead dog teams coming through, and there's like ravens floating overhead, picking up all the goodies off the trail that they're dropping. And before you know it, you find yourself just like in this wave of energy where the trail was quiet and now everything is loud. You go into every village, and it's just loaded with volunteers and veterinarians, and there's dog teams and mushers, and it's smelly, and it's loud, and it's full of life, and it's wonderful and so uniquely Alaskan. So in 2018, I was really looking forward to this because I didn't get to experience that in 2017. So I knew I had these 2 parts of trail to really like sink my teeth into. We set off down the trail, and maybe 2-3 days in, I was riding with a couple friends, and at this time I was riding with my friend Phil Hofstetter from Nome, and we're coming down the backside of the Alaska Range through this region called the Farewell Lakes, and Phil had gotten ahead of me, and I'm looking at his tracks, and suddenly his bike tracks turn into a bike track and boot tracks, and I'm wondering, well, what's going on here? And it continues on, and then his tracks veer off the trail, and he's out in the burnt-over black spruce trees, and I don't know what's going on, and I come around a corner, and there is Phil standing behind this small clump of burnt-over black spruce trees, and I look over, and 40 feet away, there's 2 bison, and Phil's having this standoff with these 2 bison. And then I quickly realize I'm having a standoff with 2 bison. And quickly in my head, I start thinking, oh God, I hope this is just a story. I hope this is just a story. And sure enough, the bison start to go down the trail. But unfortunately, the reason they're on the trail is all this grass grows along the edges, and the bison are just out there eating it, so they stay along the trail. We keep on going. There's the bison again. Boom, we have another standoff. I don't know if you've had a standoff with bison, but I guarantee you have no idea what to do around bison. Maybe bears or moose or something, you know what's going on, but bison are big, dumb, aggressive animals. And I'm sitting there in my head, I'm thinking, God, I hope this is just a story. I hope this is just a story. And sure enough, they clear off and they continue along the way, and it was just a story. Maybe 4 or 5 days later, my friend Phil had gotten ahead of me, and now I'm traveling with my really good friend Jay Cable from here in Fairbanks, and we had made it past McGrath, and we're riding through this like endless series of hills from the ghost town of Iditarod to Shaktoolik along the Innoko River. It's just up and down these like 300-foot hills. And maybe it's 2 in the morning, and we're riding our bikes along, and there's this fresh little layer of snow. And I'm riding up this hill following these wolf tracks, which like isn't that uncommon on the Iditarod Trail. Wolves are everywhere, but you don't encounter them much. So we're riding up this hill, and I'm listening to music, and it's 2 in the morning. I'm trying to keep awake, and all of a sudden, like, the world erupts, and I don't know why my headphones are so loud, and then I hear my friend Jay screaming behind me, and if anyone knows Jay Cable, he never screams, ever, and I quickly know there's something wrong, and this isn't my headphones. No, these are dogs, and they're barking, and I go, no, Kevin, these aren't dogs barking, these are wolves howling, and I take my headphones out, and I hear Jay, and he's howling back up at me, and I'm looking back down the trail howling at Jay, and the wolves are howling at us, and Jay and I start to make the slowest getaway ever from wolves, and we are riding these like 60-pound bikes 3 miles an hour up the hill, and this time I'm not saying it in my head, and I'm just screaming, I hope this is just a story, I hope this is just a story. And sure enough, Jay and I were riding along. We peak the hill. We ride back down because bikes go fast downhill. And we get to this swamp, and we look back with our headlamps to see if we see any glowing eyes looking at us in the distance, and we don't. But a mile away, we can hear this pack of wolves super ticked off that they're woken up in the middle of the night. And it turned out to just be a story. So we continue along. We hit the Yukon River, we're hit with these snowstorms, things are slow. We get to Kaltag, and we portage over to the village of Unalakleet, 700 miles away from the start along the Bering Sea coast. And I'm back there again, and this time I am there with 2 adults. I've got my friend Jay, and I've got my friend Phil. And now I felt confident that I can swim in the deep end of the swimming pool. From Unalakleet, the Iditarod Trail still goes another 300 miles to Nome, which even when I've been telling this story, I've been thinking, like, good Lord, Alaska's so big. And from Unalakleet on, all 3 of us got to travel together, and it was great. And we headed up to Shaktoolik, and we had to wait out a storm to cross the sea ice to Koyuk, and it wasn't a problem. By this time, also, the dog teams had caught up to us, and I'm experienced the second half of the race. And we go through Koyuk, and we head on over along the coastline to Elam, and over the hills down to Gullivan Bay, and some tailwinds pick up, and they sweep us up into the Fish River and White Mountain Village. And this is the last community along the trail before Nome, just 85 miles before Nome. And this is the section of trail where you find the blowhole. Now, I know I introduced you to it, and let me explain to you what the blowhole actually is. You see, the trail heads right along the beach, heads westward, right towards Nome. And so you've got the open ocean to your left, and to your right, you have these 800,000-foot hills. And these hills just do enough to hold back all this cold air from the interior of the Seward Peninsula. But every once in a while, that cold air will kind of crest over those hills, and it will flush down these river valleys down to the ocean. Kind of like when you're on Alaska Airlines, you go use the bathroom and just like you flush a toilet, like on an airline. That's the blowhole. And so there's these series of valleys, and you never know which one's being flushed and which one isn't, but there's probably one being flushed at the time. And these are like, it'll go from nothing, dead calm, to 70-mile-an-hour winds like that, and you have no idea. Now, I'd never been through here, but I was traveling with these 2 adults that had been, so I kind of had an idea. This was the 18th day on the trail. We were in White Mountain. It was the evening time, and we decided we'll eat some dinner, we'll get some rest, and around midnight, we're going to take off for our last 85 miles of the trail. We wake up at midnight, we leave White Mountain, and we drop off the riverbank onto the Fish River, and there on the right is the Iditarod sled dog race checkpoint. And you've got just dog teams lined up, lying down in straw. There's a few of them that are up and barking, and you got dogs jumping in harness ready to go. You got other dogs just lying down. And us three on a bike, we just roll away, and we leave the lights of town behind and the sounds of these dogs barking, and it's just wonderful. It's 0 degrees, there's no wind, it's clear skies, we see the stars, and we make our way along the trail, and we get into this place called the Topcock Hills, and these hills are totally barren. There's no trees out there, and I know that this is the spot that the blowhole can start, but it's dead calm. And now maybe we're 70 miles from the finish, and I had 15 days on the trail the year before, and 18 days now. I had spent over a month on the trail away from my family over a year, and I'm 1,600 miles in, and I'm thinking, we're going to do this. And we continue along, and I'm looking around, and then suddenly the northern lights come out, and they're dancing around, and I'm all kind of out of it in the middle of the night, because that's what happens, and you're just like, wow. And I'm staring around, and I look over my shoulder, and there's 3 headlamps a couple miles back that I see just rolling through the hills. And there are these 3 dog teams that had left White Mountain not long after we did. We continue along, and there's like one last hill in the Topcock Hills, and you drop 500 feet down to the beach. And just before that, these 3 dog teams, they go right on by us, and they continue along. At the bottom of these hills, there's a shelter cabin, and we had planned on stopping there. But again, the evening was beautiful, the skies were clear, and the winds were calm. But as we come down from this last hill, where you feel so exposed and thinking, now I'm in the shelter, I start to feel this small breeze, and the bit of willow that's there starts to wave a little bit. And we get down to the bottom of the hill, and this is probably totally imagination, but I swear I got down to the bottom, and I could just stick my hand out in the trail, and someone was flushing that blowhole, and just... The wind picked up out of the middle of nowhere, and luckily here we are at this shelter cabin, and the 3 of us, we gather into this shelter cabin, and we put on all the clothes that we have. And Phil from Nome starts telling me, Kev, just remember, this is the last spot, probably about 8 miles long, and at the end of this, there's this place called the Safety Roadhouse, which seems like a pretty apt name from where I'm standing. And he says, by then it should be over. And so we set out, and the cabin's just kind of shaking in the wind, and you can hear the wind blowing through, and we walk outside, and surely there's no way we can ride a bike, so we don't even try, and we just start pushing our bikes down the coast of the Bering Sea. And I've got my head down, and my fur ruff is being blown to the side, and I can just kind of see out of my left eye, just barely. And I think that Jay starts trying to make some kind of joke, but you can't hear anything because these winds are moving like 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. It was so loud. And he's making some joke, and I am terrified. And right then, I felt like the little kid, you know when you're a little kid and you're in a swimming pool, and suddenly your toes can't touch the bottom of the pool, and you absolutely panic, and then you look at your parents, and they're totally fine because they can still touch the bottom? Jay and Phil were my parents, and I was that little kid just like struggling and terrified. And so I just follow along Phil's wheel, and I'm walking right behind him, and I look up, and there's this headlamp coming towards us from Nome, and this is not the right direction. And sure enough, it's one of those dog teams. And he comes up to us, and he's talking to Phil, and again, you can't hear anything that's going on, but I make out he got turned around. His dogs got totally disoriented, and now suddenly he had no idea he was coming back in our direction. And we help this dog musher, and we get him turned around. We let him know, just keep that wind to your right shoulder, and you'll be going the right direction. And so he continues down the way. That sled is just like dodging and weaving over the ice, and there's snow blowing and dust, and it's loud, and we see him going away, and we never see him again. We keep walking, and this blowhole may be 8 miles wide, and we're about 4 miles into it, and I'm just behind Phil, and suddenly, boom, I run into his wheel, and he had stopped. And I look up, and he's saying something. I don't know what he's saying, and I look to where his headlamp's pointing, and then I hear, dog team! And I look over to the right, and there's a dog team with 10 dogs hooked up, and they're all just lying down, and there's not a dog musher with them. We take literally one more step and look to our left, and there, dog team! Another 10 dogs hooked up around some driftwood, and there's a dog sled, and there's no dog musher. And the wind is just screaming, and we can't hear anything, and we kind of start to panic real quick. And I look over at this second dog sled, and there on the leeward side of that dog sled are 2 dog mushers huddled together, holding on to each other, sitting on some sleeping bag. And we start screaming at them, and no one can hear anything, and they're not responding. And we go up, and Phil shakes one of their shoulders, and he pops to life. And he starts panicking and trying to tell us the story, and Phil's yelling back at him, "You got to get out of here. You're in the blowhole. Nobody stops in the blowhole." And this guy, Scott, his name's Scott Janssen, a musher, he's screaming back at Phil and telling us a story about, "My friend Jim here, he got hung up on the driftwood. He can't move. I lost my gloves. I lost everything. We can't move. I'm not leaving my friend." And Phil's yelling back at him, "You need to move. I'm not leaving him." And this whole time, the other dog musher, he's just lying there entirely unresponsive. And so in this whole melee, the musher, Scott Janssen, lets us know he thinks maybe he called for help. He has a satellite phone, and he asked Jay, "Hey, my hands don't work. Get my satellite phone out. I need to call my wife." And so Jay starts digging through his pockets, and he's finding nothing. And I look over, and on his sled dog bag, there I see it, his satellite phone. Like he had gotten it out right when he showed up and knew that this was an emergency immediately, but never called for help. We pick up his satellite phone, and we walk it over to him, and his wife's number's the first one there, and you just press the green button, and Jay hands him the phone. And again, the wind is just blasting. I can't understand anything he's saying, but I'm kind of trying to make it out. And it takes a bit of time in this life-threatening situation, and I come to realize I think I'm listening to a domestic dispute between a husband and a wife. And sure enough, they're yelling back and forth, and I can just imagine myself failing in the exact same way. And Scott ends the phone call with, "Just call the damn troopers, we're dying out here." And that was the end of the phone call. And in this time, I'm just standing there, and I am freezing. I don't know what to do, and I'm just trying not to be a liability. The dog mushers and us, we carry these trackers on us so you can see it online, but all these trackers have a little beacon on them that you can press the SOS button, and an emergency rescue is going to come your way. Scott doesn't know if you ever press that button. Jay finds his tracker, lets him know, "You never press the button. Press the damn button! Like, I got to let you know you're going to be disqualified from the race if I press this button for you. Press the damn button!" Jay presses the button, and that's the last thing that I heard, because at the same time, Jay and Phil are seeing me start to freeze, and they say, "Kev, get moving, get down the trail. There's a cabin probably 3 miles down the trail on your right called Tommy Johnson's cabin. We'll meet you there." And I get moving because nobody stops in the blowhole. So I'm walking down the trail, and I make my way 3 miles down the trail to Tommy Johnson's cabin. I'm by myself, and this is not the cabin I expected. There's no windows, there's no doors. It's totally blown in with snow. So I just crouched behind this place, and I put on the rest of the layers that I had, and I just waited for my friends because I didn't know what I was doing. And a few minutes later, Jay and Phil come up because there's not much else they could do for these mushers, and they know nobody stops in the blowhole. So they continue along, and Jay ends up diving through these snowbanks into the cabin because Jay has this InReach device, which is like a messaging device. You can send messages with it, but not if you're freezing cold in the wind. So Jay dives into this cabin anyhow, and he gets in there, and he sends Phil's wife a message that says, "Musher's stuck in the blowhole. Send the troopers now." Now, Phil's wife's in Nome waiting for the finish. When they showed up there, we had no idea if there was going to be help along the way for these guys. All we know is that we heard a fight between a husband and a wife, and maybe we pressed a button, but nothing was sure. We send out this message, and right away we get a message back from Phil's wife saying, "Got it, troopers on their way." And so we decide we need to keep moving on. And so we do, because nobody stops in the blowhole. We keep on walking on, and now the sun starts rising. And I see all these snow machines coming down the trail from Nome. And the first one that comes along, they stop. And it's this musher. Her name's Jessie Royer. She had finished the race maybe a day or two before. And she lets us know we saw their trackers, and I was super nervous, so she was on her way back to check on the mushers. The next group of snow machines that come on by, that's Gnome Search and Rescue, and they stop and let us know we're going back, we're going to get the mushers. So we keep on walking, and the wind keeps on blowing, and I'm just wondering when it's going to stop, and it didn't seem like too long later, here comes the snow machines back by us. And there's 2 mushers on the back of 2 of them, like rag dolls, making their way to the safety roadhouse, and they're alive. Then after that, there's another snow machine that comes by, and I look out of the corner of my eye, and there's not 12 dogs or 10 dogs hooked up, there's 24 dogs hooked up to one snow machine, tails wagging, trotting all the way to Nome, pulling a snow machine instead of pulling a dog sled the rest of the way. And those teams teamed up, and they made their way all the way into Nome. Later in that day, the wind dies down. I mean, the wind died down like that. It was the blowhole, and it really is amazing. The only time I've ever been through here, and we made it to safety, and we made it to Nome, and it turns out that that was just a story, too. But in the end, I learned 3 lessons that day. I learned, first of all, if you're going to swim in the deep end of a pool, bring an adult. Second of all, there's always time to have a fight with your wife. And third of all, you never stop in the blowhole. Thank you, guys.
Kevin Breitenbach. All right, I was in Montreal in 2013 visiting the city with a friend. We were 2 poor 20-year-old students, so we stayed in a hostel downtown. We had a shared room with many bunk beds. I slept in the lower bed, my girlfriend on top. At 4 a.m., a group of young drunk men came in the room, and one of them peed on my bed, on the bedpost near my pillow. I woke up screaming, yelling at him and his stupid friends, waking up the entire room full of people. They were very sorry, and one of them was so sick he ended up puking on the floor. We had a lot of puke-themed stories here tonight. What a terrible night. Packed our bags and left that same hour. Well, that's what you get for going to Canada. Shot at on Valdez Glacier Lake at midnight in July. Fully automatic rifles. I like that. It's like, if it was just regular rifles, fully automatic, that is a faux pas. And I was visiting my sister in Conakry, Guinea. I was scheduled to return to Alaska at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. At 3 p.m. on that Tuesday, I went into town to purchase some last-minute souvenirs. I did not have my passport with me. At 4 p.m., I was in jail. That's awesome. Okay, well, one thing I've learned from doing Dark Winter Nights all these years is that all the dads move their cars right after the last storyteller. It was like a mad rush. So I've learned to thank people before the last storyteller. And so I'd like to thank our opening act, Kinky Slinky, Mary Beth Lee, John Keach, Bill Schnabel. The Herring Auditorium staff, Deidre Sagers. Sound people, Josh Bennett and Baron Bonamy, who's Banami. Our lighting by Maite Gopian, up there. Photograph for the poster and program by my dear friend Sarah Manriquez. I'd like to thank KUAC, Lori Neufeld, Gretchen Gordon, Molly of Denali, Yatabe Evans. And thank you, KUAC, for bringing Molly of Denali to the show and to your television every weekday at when? Oh, we found the morning people and the evening people. 6 a.m., 2 p.m. And also thank you for KUAC. They air like all of our stuff in prime time, and that is a big deal. So our TV shows, our radio program, which is the last Saturday of the month at 7 p.m. on KUAC, September through May. Fairbanks Distilling, Safeway, Papa John's, our lobby entertainment, Bon Couillons. Was it good? Did you? I'd like to thank also all of our volunteers who work so hard for just a t-shirt and free admission. It's a pretty cool t-shirt, though. Have you seen it? It's got a DeLorean and a spaceman on it. All right. Fine. You can pay the $20 then, I guess. And the real force behind Dark Winter Nights, the only reason it continues, is our executive producers, Ryan Legusto Peterson, Robin, late as usual, Robin, Chris Weputa Zwolinski, Brittany et tu Brittany Carnes. A round of applause. Seriously, they are the thing I am most proud of. Okay, sometimes in life we have to go a very long distance just to achieve a very small goal. You know what I'm talking about if you ever drove to Anchorage for Arby's. Anybody here do that? All right, we got one. Thank goodness they built one here. Our next storyteller takes the cake when it comes to this, though. Please welcome to the stage Karl Monetti with a story we call How to Recruit a Rugby Player.
That good?
Thank you. Yep.
All right. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Probably don't even know what rugby is, but it's a game. It came out of soccer, and it turned into American football. There's a bunch of people that play it in the United States, and this is an old rugby ball. It's an old leather one. They don't make them like this anymore, but I brought it on stage to keep me on track because I got a good memory, but it's short. As you can see, this ball doesn't hold air anymore, but either do I, so we make a good pair. I was first introduced to the game when I was 23 years old. I was in Philadelphia going to veterinary school, and I had never really played any organized sports before because I had really low self-confidence. I hadn't played in high school or college, either one. But there were two students in my veterinary class who were playing rugby for the Philadelphia club, and they kept trying to entice me to come out to practice. Well, I'd been to one or two of their after-match parties, and that was really a blast, really a lot of fun. But the only thing I'd ever heard about the game was it takes leather balls to play rugby. And let that sink in a minute. When you think about it, you got a soccer field, two 15-man sides, no pads, full contact, no timeouts, and no substitutions. I sort of took it at its word. But anyway, one day fate intervened when one of my two buddies and I had caught a squirrel in a live trap, and we were trying to coax it into the cook pot for dinner, and I managed to mangle his hand by accident, but that's another story altogether. The upshot was he made me take two promises. One, that I would take over his kennel cleaning job in the morning before school, and the other, that I would take over his place on the rugby team. Well, that was the more daunting of the two. But the very next time I had an opportunity to go to practice, I went to one with my other rugby buddy. We got to the field, and he pointed to this fellow over on the sideline, a little fire plug of a guy. He said, that over there, that's Smedley Sharp. You go talk to him and follow him around. He'll teach you how to play the game. So I go over to this fella, and I introduce myself. And I said, Smedley, I don't know how this game is played. I've never even seen a game. I said, what are the rules? He said, there are no rules in rugby. There's only laws. I said, well, what are the laws? So there's a whole bunch of them, but there's only one you need to worry about. I said, which one is that? He said, the foul play law. I said, well, how does that go? He said, there shall be no foul play. Well, I followed Smedley around and had a great time at the practice. The coaches actually saw some promise in me, and they put me on the roster for the next game that they played. Well, we had about 60 people on the roster, and we could field three teams, an A and a B and a C side, so they put me on the C team. And I had a great time. I even scored that first game, and then over the next 4 seasons that I played with them, I was rarely not selected for the A team, so I was usually on the A side. We played all over the East Coast. Anyway, the game sort of changed my life in that it gave me that self-confidence I'd been lacking, and I felt I was ready to take on the world. I felt invincible almost after playing a game like that for 4 years. So anyway, after vet school, I moved out to Colorado. I practiced with the Denver team a couple of times until I broke my wrist wrestling with a cow on a farm call. And then after a short stint in Wyoming as a cowboy and Montana as a veterinarian, I ended up in Fairbanks in 1971, and all things Alaskan eclipsed my whole former life, and I forgot about rugby for 10 years. In 1981, I saw an ad in the paper. The local borough Parks and Rec director, Rick McCarthy, was starting a rugby team here in Fairbanks. I didn't even know there was a rugby in Alaska at all. But I answered that ad, and I went up. The first practice was at UAF by the old Beluga. And we had about 18 or 20 people showed up for that first practice. And within a couple of weeks, I found myself as the president of the club, the main coach, the captain of the team, and one of the chief recruiters. So anybody who looked remotely athletic got accosted by me, and anybody who was wearing a rugby shirt that I saw. But unfortunately, at the time, rugby jerseys were sort of a fashion statement. So I ended up encountering a lot of what I called Nordstrom ruggers, who only looked the part and had no idea how the game was played or what it even was. But one day, I'll give you an example of one recruiting I did. About 1984, I was playing handball in one of the glass courts at the old athletic club. It's now latitude 65, I think. And I looked out the back of the court, and this young fella gets on an exercise bike, and he's got a rugby jersey on. So I paused my game, said, wait a minute, emergency. Don't want to let this guy get away. So I went out, and I found out he's actually a German rugby player who was over here teaching English at Lathrop High School for a year. So got that recruit. So about 3 years prior to that, 1980, 81, I was playing handball and swimming up at the university. That athletic club hadn't been opened yet. And the only thing that bothered me is they charged $2 or $3 each time you use the facilities. You know, being the cheapskate that I am, I figured I'd try to circumvent that. And I found out that if you're an alumnus of the school, you could get in to use the facilities for no charge. So I went looking for a course. I figured, one class ought to do it. So I found a night school course, not a night school, but it was a night school course for flight school for pilots. I'd never had any inclination to buy a plane, and I certainly didn't have the money to buy a plane. But I did fly with some friends, and I figured, what the heck, I might as well learn how to at least land a plane in case my pilot conked out or bailed out on me. So I enrolled in the class. That same winter, I had a dog team for years, but I had a number of clients who were dog mushers, and several of them who were Iditarod mushers, and they asked if I would maybe get onto the Iditarod race as a volunteer, as a veterinarian. So I did that. I signed up for that, and I also, for the first time, got interested in the Iditarod raffle, largely because the first prize for that year was to be a brand new Super Cub airplane, the ultimate bush plane. So and I didn't know how to fly, but I was taking a course, so I said, what the heck? I'm going to buy a ticket. So the way the raffle works is there's anywhere from, 50 to 70 people that join the race to begin with. The mushers each get a bib at the starting line, and they wear it through the whole race. At the end of the race, the top 20 finishers are given a cash prize, and attached to each of those cash prizes is a raffle prize. So the 20th place raffle winner might get 5 bags of dog food or something like that, and then the prizes get better the closer you get to the first place, and you might get 2 tickets on the Alaska Railroad, 2 tickets on Alaska Airlines anywhere they fly, maybe 100 gallons of fuel oil or a snow machine, and then the top prize is that Super Cub. So at the banquet, after the race is over, let's say the 20th place person, well, first off, I'll tell you, there's only 1,049 tickets that are sold. They're $100 a piece, but there's only 1,049. So that's a pretty good odds to begin with. And at the banquet, let's say the 20th place musher was Joe Schmo, and he wore bib number, let's say he wore number 6. So he reaches into the rotating bin there, and he pulls out 6 tickets. Out of those tickets, somebody from the audience comes out and picks the winner. That person gets the 5 bags of dog food. All the tickets go back in. Then the 19th place musher picks out whatever bib number he or she wore. It might have been 35 or 50. That number of tickets comes out, the winner comes out of those 50, they all go back in the bin. So you have 1,049 tickets, $100 a piece, 20 chances to win. Good odds. So again, I determined to buy a ticket. I was stationed in Grayling for the race, and that's on the Yukon River, and I went right to the race headquarters, but there were no tickets available. So I got ferried over to Unalakleet after all the mushers went through Grayling, and there were no tickets available there. So finally they sent me up to Nome. I got there the day before the first musher got in, and I went right to the race headquarters, and just as I'm going up the stairs, out comes the race marshal, Al Crane, and he tries to sell me a ticket. I said, Al, I've been trying to buy a ticket for a week. I don't consider this a gamble. I consider it an investment. Sell me a ticket, which he did. Well, where was I going with this? It's supposed to be a Super Cub. Nothing. Got a call. I was unable. Yeah, that's part of it. I was unable to stay for the banquet because I had to get back and work at my veterinary practice. But the night of the banquet, actually the morning after, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I did get a call. Thank you. From Al Crane, a little bit tipsy, but he said, "You've just won the Super Cub airplane." Woo. That's what I thought. I was flabbergasted, amazed, and delighted. And I didn't even have a pilot's license. So, well, the story gets better. Rick Swenson won the race that year, and he had bib number 13. So he pulled out 13 tickets out of that bin, 3 of which had his name or his dad's name on them. They had bought 7 tickets that year. I never found out who the person was that picked mine out of the 13. But every time I see Rick, he insists that I stole his airplane. I just feel that it's his own darn fault. If he hadn't won the race, he wouldn't have picked my ticket. So, anyway, a couple weeks later, Al Crane flew that plane up from Anchorage to North Pole. We put it at Bradley Sky Ranch until I could finish ground school, which happened about the end of April. And then I enlisted my ground school instructor as my flight instructor. And Jack had taught us a lot of stuff, all the things that were necessary in ground school about the mechanics of flight and everything. But he gave us 3 pieces of advice. He said, 3 things that don't do a pilot any good. 1 is gas in the ground. 2 is runway behind you. And 3 is altitude above you. In other words, always make sure you got plenty of fuel. Use the whole runway if you need it, and get some altitude so that if you have an emergency, you have some options to land. Anyway, we made our first flight together, and we did our walk around and weight and balance calculations and everything. We hop in the plane. Well, a Super Cub, as most of you probably know, is a tail dragger, and it sits on the ground. It sits like this with the prop up and the tail down. And when you're in the pilot seat, it's tandem. Pilot sits in the front, co-pilot or passenger sits in the back. When I was sitting in the front, I could barely see over the cowling to see the runway. Jack was 5'2". I was 6'8". All he could see was me. To this day, I can't tell if he was the craziest person I've ever met or the bravest for sitting back there and putting his life in the hands of a student pilot that had never flown before. Anyway, we taxied to the end of the runway, and we turned down there facing into the wind, and he says, "Okay, Karl, take off." I said, "Jack, you're supposed to teach me how to fly." He said, "I already taught you how to fly in ground school. Planes want to fly. You just keep her pointed down the runway, give it full throttle, and we will take off." And darned if he wasn't right. Took about 1,000 feet or 1,200 feet to do it, but we flew. And it was just, what a feeling that for my first time being a pilot. Anyway, for the next hour or so, we did probably 8 or 10 full stop landings and takeoffs, and then we flew out over the Tanana Flats to do some steep turns and shallow turns and some stall practice. I need to tell you what a stall is in an airplane. It has nothing to do with your engine. When you're flying along in level flight, the difference in airflow over the top of the wing and the bottom create lift that keeps you up in the air. Well, if you have too steep an attack toward the wind or toward the air, you lose that lift and you just plummet out of the sky. So this is a really important thing to practice, and we did it at about 3,000 feet, so you had plenty of time to recover. Anyway, over the next few weeks, I had a few more flights with Jack, and he soloed me, and then a couple weeks later, I had a flight test, and I got my license. And over the next year and a half or so, I put on probably 400 or 500 hours on that plane. I went everywhere with it. I hunted, I fished, I sightseed, I did veterinary clinics out in Tanana and McGrath and Eagle and places like that. Bought skis for winter travel, and I even went to Anchorage and Homer a couple times to play rugby. Remember rugby? This is a story about rugby. Now, where was I? Oh, so about July of 1982, sorry about this, I got sidetracked again. July of 1982, a friend of mine asked me if I would take his girlfriend up to see the midnight sun. She had just flown in from France and wanted to really see the midnight sun, but it was too late to see anything from around here, so I agreed to do that. And she was living on a little cabin up off of Farmers Loop Road, and I had flown over a small airstrip up there that I'd seen several planes parked around. I'd never landed there, but I figured it was a safe place to land, so I decided to meet her there. So I met her there at 10 o'clock one evening, and it's one of these uphill, downhill runways. I landed at the bottom and taxied to the top. Turned around, she got in, and off we go. So we're going down the runway, and just as I got airborne, I got sort of kicked off to the right of the runway, about 10 or 15 feet. There's no danger involved in it, but it sure got my attention, and I said, I'm not going to pay more attention when I come back here and drop her off. So we flew around for a couple hours and up north of Fort Yukon, stopped in Fort Yukon, walked around, showed her a village, and we did see the midnight sun, and came back about 2 o'clock in the morning, still plenty of daylight and everything. She got on her bike and was ready to go back to her cabin, and I turned the plane around to attack this runway one more time. Well, I started down the runway, and I don't know how far down, maybe a third of the way down, maybe 150 feet or so. I found myself all of a sudden popped up into the air into what I immediately recognized was a stall. So Jack's training had drilled into us a couple of really important things. Get the nose down, make sure you have full power and stuff like that. But he told us there were 3 or 4 physical forces that when you're in that kind of an attitude in an airplane, they make you turn to the left. Well, at 3,000 feet, when we were practicing them, it didn't make much difference if you ended up 20 feet to the left. But at 50 feet off the ground, it sure did, because I managed to recover from this stall and was just about to pat myself on the back for having done so when my left wingtip hit the windsock pole. I was about 20 feet to the left of where I should have been. That stopped my left wing, sped up my right wing, which gave it more lift, and I went into a steep arcing dive and augured straight into the ground. My passenger had heard the wreck and called the ambulance, and they came and found me unconscious, suspended by my seatbelt and shoulder harnesses, which I never go away from the curb anymore in my car without, bleeding from my forehead and gas dripping all over me. So they got me out and took me to the hospital. So, but the only good thing about it I got this real handsome scar on my forehead, a nice little Z. It improved my looks 100-fold. And you should have seen me before. It's terrible. But the other thing was I'd been suffering from some back pain for about 5 years. And for the year following that wreck, I was pain-free. I figured I'd had the ultimate in chiropractic manipulation. But I cannot recommend it as the first choice of treatment. Oh, rugby, yeah. Sorry, I knew this would come in handy. So I wake up in the hospital, and I'm looking up. I'm on the operating table, and I look up into the handsome face of this young emergency room physician. His name turned out to be Steve McCormick. He's suturing up my forehead. And he sees me open my eyes, and he says, hey, buddy, how you feeling? I feel like I've been in a plane wreck. I think I might have broke my arm and maybe a couple ribs. He said, no, your arm's not broken, and we took some x-rays of your ribs. We'll look at that a little bit later. But it looks like you're going to be out of commission for a couple weeks. I said, yeah, that's the worst part. I said, I won't be able to play rugby this weekend. He said, there's a rugby team in Fairbanks? I said, yeah, do you play? He says, yeah, I played all through college and med school. I said, what position do you play? He said, I'm a lock. It's the same position I play. So I said, guess what? You're going to take my place on the rugby pitch tonight. And that is how you recruit a rugby player. I'm crippled and I'm old, but I'm still involved in the game, so I might try to recruit one of you guys. If don't, be careful. Thank you very much.
Karl Monetti, thank you all for coming out. Remember, we need your stories. Email us. Turn those in those forms after the show. Go to our website. Help us share the real Alaska with the world. I'd like to welcome one more time our storytellers up on stage. Chris Zwolinski, Nick Janssen, Putt Clark, Nijah Steinkruger, come on up. Kevin Breitenbach, Karl Monetti, and Kinky Slinky. Remember, these are the stories we tell up here in Alaska on dark winter nights. Good night.